my chest. Buying a new aircraft or yacht or whatever, or living large, and it's a failure. It's a failure. I mean, you can't have kids who are hungry and you are living lavishly and going to parties and wearing the biggest agbada. We need to, when there's a protest is like your kids coming to tell you that, Daddy, I'm not happy with you. I have failed. You have failed to do this and do that for me. We need to, I would ask him to really rethink a number of things that are going on and test his policies. The policy of floating the currency, I think, was a mistake because it wasn't thought through. Because the largest pressure on the Nigerian currency is the importation of fuel. And the way it's being done is fueled by corruption. So we're paying the price for it. I mean, if you take care of the things that ought to have been taken care of, like I said, the things that we can manufacture here, we insist, increase tariff on things that we really don't need to dissuade people from seeking to import them, encouraging people to manufacture the things that you can give concessions to young men, go produce this, we'll show you that the market is there for it and all that, and we will not encourage others, we will dissuade others from importing those items because we're going to hike the tariff on those things. We need to focus on productivity, guarantee farmers purchase of their produce. So if I tell you go grow a hectare of cocoa, I'm guaranteeing you that I will purchase your cocoa, right? Today the farmer not only grows his cocoa, he has to market his cocoa, he has to do all sorts of things. He should just focus on producing the crop. There should be agencies, private sector and government, largely private sector, guaranteed by government, take whatever you can at the price. So at the beginning of the farming season, we tell you that, okay, for oil palm or cassava, this is what we're going to pay you at the end of the farming season when we're harvesting. So there's that certainty that we're working on. Those are the things that we need to be doing at this time. But we need to indigenize the way we think.
Eminent guest, former governor of Cross River State, a former presidential aspirant, a notable Nigerian lawyer, and a most prominent politician. I'd like to welcome Mr. Donald Duke to Inside Sources. Excellency, you are welcome to Inside Sources.
Thank you, Laulu.
Thank you for coming. Now, I like to openly this way, Excellency, you became a governor at the very beginning of what is now described as the Fourth Republic in 1999. And you are governor all the way up to 2007, you had 2 full terms. If you look at where we are today, considering the fact that we have had 25 years of civil rule, would you say that the Nigerian people has gotten a significant democracy dividend between 1999 and today?
Evidently, we could have done a lot better. In some aspects, we have done minimally well. In others, we've been deplorable. Let's recall that the events that led us to the agitation, the last few years that led to the agitation of the Fourth Republic, was the desire for better economic conditions, the rule of law and all sorts. I don't think we've attained those things, those desires that people were clamoring for. Yes, we can thump our chest that we have somewhat of a democracy. Even that is questionable. The way elections are conducted, the agitation for a better constitution that reflects the will of the people, the concerns about the judiciary, the attitude of politicians. We need to really redress ourselves. I don't think we have lived up to the expectations of our people.
All right, so let's try to unpack that by exploring what will you consider, in your own view, to be the major issues, maybe the top 1 or 2 issues that we need to sort out, in your view. Is it political reforms? Is it economic reforms? Yeah.
Well, before we go into the political and the economic, we need to get the economy working for the people. That's the bottom line. At the end of the day, people really don't care how they're governed, or as much as they're concerned about the bread and butter, putting food on the table. That's one. Then the second one, and probably are just as important, is security. Those 2 things go hand in hand. We need to ensure that our economy can take care of us and we're secure in an environment. And let me remind you, Laulu, the function of a government is to ensure the productivity of each of her citizens within an orderly environment. As long as we don't have an orderly environment, which is a secured environment governed by the rule of law, and our citizens are not productive, and I can tell you that if you look at the unemployment ratio in our country, we're largely unproductive, and so the dependency ratio is too high. Then we have failed our people. We really need to redress this urgently too, because that is what will determine the stability of the nation.
All right, so let's go a little deeper on that economic front. Now, I think everybody agrees to the fact that one of the most contentious issues in terms of the economy is the fact of how much money has been going into subsidy, how its removal over the years at different times will affect the whole economy, and what has happened since May 29, where the current president got into office and said subsidy is gone, and then how that has, led to a time of tremendous hunger, among the Nigerian people. So, what will you have done differently? I mean, you were a presidential candidate, in 2007, before you stepped down, and of course, even after that. So I wanted to ask you that, so seeing and understanding the critical nature of the issue of subsidy, what would you have done differently, or what would you have wanted the government to do differently from what has happened, Excellency?
Two things. First of all, this issue of subsidy has to be understood, and I'll explain what I mean. If you are a farmer in your household and you grow, say, 100 kilograms of cassava, you decide to sell 80 kilograms and retain 20 kilograms for household consumption, would you say you're subsidizing your family? That's the first thing. We produce about 1.5 on a good day million barrels of crude. Now, we state that we refine about 450, okay? And we use the international price to gauge that. We did contract refining. So with contract refining, you're giving the funding, you're getting refineries to refine it for you. So the question is, how much is the cost of refining? Then you can determine how much of the cost of you want to sell to your own people. The challenge is that make sure it stays within your borders and doesn't go outside your borders. So I still question this thing we call subsidy. Better still, today that we seem to have the capacity with private refineries coming up, we seem to have the capacity to refine our fuel locally. It's to ask the refiners, how much would it cost you to refine a barrel of oil? And if they give you the price X, then you can add Y to it and determine that this is what my people can afford, right? And not gauge it on what the international price is. Now, the second thing is, for every policy, there are consequences. I think this administration made a fundamental error in announcing policies that had not been debated, because there are consequences for everything. So if for instance you say you're floating the naira, when you float it goes up, then the most important item that consumes your foreign exchange is also petroleum products. So the price will also go up, and that is adding to the inflation we have today. There are 4 factors that affect inflation in Nigeria: the high cost of energy, overinflated contracts, ill distribution of wealth, and fourthly, high interest rates. Now, if you look at energy, we not only did we increase the price of fuel by that announcement the president made, we put enormous pressure on the foreign exchange regime, so everything went up. We didn't stop there. We now increased the price of electricity almost 2 or 3-fold. Now, I've said this over and over again. 70% of electricity in Nigeria is generated through gas. We flare a lot of our gas. We can determine how much gas can be for local consumption, and of course, internationally, it will be based on the international prices. So we can afford, for instance, to say we're going to sell our gas to ourselves at 100 naira per scoff. It's our gas, and besides, we have enormous quantities of it, and we flare a lot of it. You've got to take care of your local industry, because your local productivity, whether for the individual or for the corporate entities. So we're not doing that. We're still trying to measure everything internationally. We're not there yet. Our people are so poor, they can hardly afford that. The next thing I mentioned here was inflated contracts. Most of the contracts we award in Nigeria are 3-4 times what they ought to be. That puts a lot of money out there that ought not to go into a particular, could go to other places. What we are doing to our people is just not sustainable. We've got to revisit all those policies and put our people first. And this is not a subsidy. This is enhancing the productivity of our people. If you reduce energy prices and people become more productive, right, the economy will grow even further. A lot of companies are leaving Nigeria today because the cost of production, I mean, let's take a company recently, Guinness, Nigeria. The cost of production and the exchange rates and all that does not allow them, you have got to measure how much is it worth all the trouble they're taking. Now, if you can domesticate energy prices, and the oil that, because I said to you earlier, Laulu, that over 60% of the pressure on our foreign exchange earnings is oil imports. If you can domesticate that, the exchange rate will dramatically drop. But even beyond that, we need to question the things we import. We are running an import-dependent economy, which is wrong. With 230 million people growing every year, we need to run a productive manufacturing agrarian economy. We're not doing that. We literally import everything, and we're comfortable doing that at the expense of our people. If you've got to look at all the things you import and see how you can manufacture them locally, or at least assemble. You need to put value added into everything that comes into the country, or as much as you can. Because the kernel of it all is to ensure that the Nigerian is a productive entity. That's a function of government.
Excellent point. I find your idea of quote unquote domesticating the pricing of fuel, I find it quite illuminating, and something that normally shouldn't be a problem. But are we sure that the producers now, even the Dangote refinery and the other smaller refineries, I think if I get my facts right, they seem to have resisted that idea. For instance, so Dangote is saying that, well, look, I have invested this much money, got a lot of credit lines, as a matter of fact, even have to be getting crude from abroad. My question to you is like that, how do we make the local producers of refined products now to price it in a way that is, in line with your idea of domestic pricing of fuel? Because I think it's because it can actually be a game changer. But let's move along, Excellency, to security. Just like you said in your introduction, these are the key objectives of having a government, is to make the welfare and the security of the people. Now, in your own assessment, we've been dealing with recurrent insecurity, for over a decade now. What do you think is the missing puzzle, in your view, former Governor Duke?
Consequences, one word. You see, if in your home there's a breach of security, the first people or persons you will hold responsible are those you have employed for the security of your home. So in a normal house, you have a security man at the gate. You're going to ask him, where were you? Were you asleep when this was happening? Were you patrolling and all that? The absence of consequences in Nigeria is responsible for where we are today. So you go to, let's take a local government. There's a local government somewhere in Plateau State a couple of years ago that was ransacked and people were killed. In that local government, you have the police, and you have a DPO, you have the SSS, you have the brigade commander, you even have a GOC overlooking a particular area, Air Force, Navy, as it could be if it's by the coast. These people are employed to address the security of the state. So if anything happens, you hold them. They are the first points of responsibility. And if they're found wanting, there are consequences. You could be dismissed from your post. But look, we have been in a state of insecurity now for over 15 years or more. And nobody has been fired from his job. Nobody has been held accountable, right? So it's business as usual. Obviously, there are people, and huge amounts of money are being spent on security. There are people who have a vested stake in keeping us insecure. I don't believe the Nigerian military is so inept that they can't deal with these ragtag bandits. We haven't done it, right? Now we spend billions on security. Someone should be held accountable. What's going on here? I think it was in Buhari's administration, you had service chiefs who had served for years. I think the longest serving service chiefs were in his administration. Nothing was improved. There was no improvement in security, yet they were there for ages. You can't. I wouldn't, if I had the opportunity, I wouldn't confirm a service chief. I give you 3 months, go work it out. If you don't get it right in 3 months, you go. I'm prepared to have a service chief every 3 months until we get it right. And this is not just service chiefs, to go down the ladder, to go down to the DPOs, to go down to the SSS officers who are involved, who are there to gather security. How come we have not infiltrated the ranks of Boko Haram all these years? We should know. We should have infiltrated them long ago. That's how it works. Then Part of our security apparatus, well, one of the things we have is the inadequacy of gathering intelligence. 80% of security is intelligence gathering. 20% is enforcement. Do we even have the numbers? Take police, for instance. The UN standard is 1 policeman for 100 people. We don't have that. We have about 300 or 400 policemen employed in our system. At least half of them are escorting politicians and the affluent in society, right? The other half are ill-paid, ill-motivated, ill-trained, ill-equipped. So the challenges are enormous. We need to take ourselves seriously. Why would you have a police, or you have about 5-10 policemen escorting an individual who is probably responsible for the state of insecurity because he didn't do what he ought to have done? And that brings us to state policing. You have a bloated civil service. Within the ranks of the civil service, you can take people from the ages of, say, 25 to 35 or 40, train them in security gathering. They don't have to wear a uniform, except there's a crime that they want to intervene, right? They take care of the security. They should know all that happens within their living environment. Here you have policemen living in barracks. Policemen ought not live in barracks. They need to live amongst the people because they need to know the environment. People don't even need to know that they're policemen at all. They're there, they know everybody who's living there because if anything happens there, they're the first point of contact. What happened here, you know? So we need to redesign the security architecture, and it's everybody's business. You should have security at the local government level, at the state level, at the federal level. But most importantly, their number one response.
Now, I'm sure that you will recall, and this is how I want us to get into this discussion about corruption. When we were under the military government, the judiciary is perceived, or was perceived, to be quite much more courageous, to the extent that, you know, there were judges like Kyle Shaw, I think Justice Toby, and the rest of them, who would actually cause fear, you know, in the minds of even the generals, the head of states at that time. But it seems that today, I mean, and this is my view, I want your comment. It seems that we don't seem to have that kind of spark. The political leaders don't seem to fear the judges anymore, and there has been so much. How do I call it now? There seems to be too much relationship between the political elite and the judicial elite, to the extent that we had cases, the kind of stuff that had never happened. You have a Chief Justice of the Federation attending a political event hosted by a governor. Now, does this kind of thing also give you concern when we are talking about the judiciary and the kind of reforms that we need? Governor Duke.
Yes, it does. We have been steadily deteriorating in all facets of nationhood. Politicians and judges hobnobbing. You know, in the past, growing up, you never saw a judge. They exempted themselves from social gatherings. Now you see judges being sprayed at parties. You see lawyers hear them telling you that, look, give me so much, let me go see the judge, right? It all comes back to what I said, a lack of consequences. The NJC has not lived up to the billing. I mean, you mentioned here a Chief Justice going to a party being hosted by a governor. That never happened in the past. The current chairman of INEC, Yakubu, 4 hours to voting in 2018, postponed elections, having told us that the elections, all the materials, he was ready for it. 4 hours to commencement of voting, he postponed it, and there were no consequences. He's still in office. I mean, how do you run a country like that? I mean, if he had any iota of self-respect, he ought to have resigned from office. And his excuse was, oh, Harmattan, bad roads. But you told us everything was ready. Harmattan is not a new occurrence in Nigeria. Bad roads is not a new occurrence in Nigeria. Obviously, something was at play. So the level of inaptitude and the lack of consequences is what has brought us to this point. And the agency to met out consequences is the judiciary, and they're severely compromised. I mean, I was aghast when I heard a lawyer saying to a friend of mine that, give me so much money, let me go see the judge. It's unheard of. The judiciary has been abused by politicians, by lawyers themselves, generally by society. That revered status of a judge does not exist any longer. So, as you said earlier on, judges attend social gatherings, mix and hobnob with politicians, and get appreciation from members of society. As long as you allow what ought not to happen, it will happen. So we've got to put our foot down and say, listen, enough is enough. And people are held accountable. And also the process of appointing judges. We've got to look at them. We've got to screen them properly. You have the level of nepotism that has gone in, judges appointing their children, their relatives, and all sorts of things. In a sane society, those things should not be allowed to happen. But you can get away with literally anything in Nigeria. And this society is not going to endure as long as the judiciary is weak. So and we've got to start from there.
Thank you so much. And still on the issue of corruption, I remember Governor Duke in 2006, 2007, thereabout, the EFCC came up with a report of all the governors, and I think the BBC reported that out of the 36 governors then, there were only 5 of them that didn't have corruption cases. As a matter of fact, your name was mentioned. So I want to ask you this question about corruption. Do you think that our major problem in this country up until now, and this is my view, but I wanted to have your own view, is corruption? Because corruption has become corrosive. We just talked about what we have in the judiciary, but there's corruption in the political process. There's corruption basically from top to bottom. How is it, if you agree, how is it that we have not been able to significantly curtail corruption in our country? What's your take?
Let me understand. Corruption is not just bribery. Undermining a system is corrupting the system. So it's very far-flung. It's not just a policeman on the streets who is asking you for money to let you go or this and that. No. Each time we undermine the system that ought to be in place, we have corrupted the system. We've got to ask ourselves what sort of society we want to build. Do we want to build an enduring society or one that is literally pay as you go, which is what corruption is? It can be stemmed. It can be stemmed, but it starts from the top. You must have a leadership, and not just one leader, a leadership at the state levels, at the various levels of governance, and at the various arms of governance that decide that we're going to build a just, humane, and productive society. You see, when folks say to me, the EFC commend me, let me put it that way, or you're not one of those governors who was found wanting, I don't think there's anything to be commendable about, because when you step forward and you want to lead a people, you automatically put yourself forward as a role model. What sort of role model would I be as a governor of a state, as a leader of a people, if every other day I appear before the EFCC, I'm shown sitting on the floor in a cell? Goodness me, how do I explain that to my children? It would have been better I never got involved in politics, because I am the immediate role model. I don't want to, because in today's world, whatever you do is in the internet. So 30 years down the line, my grandchildren will say, look at my grandfather sitting on the floor. He was arrested by EFCC, but he was later on freed. No, that's sad. So I say to people, I commend you for winning elections, but I'll congratulate you after you have served your term. You have arrived after you have served. A lot of people go into politics, again, because our economy cannot take everyone. So people hustle to get into one political office or the other, commissioner, this, appointment to boards, the Senate, House, because they're all hustling. Nobody's going there for service, because our economy cannot take everyone. And so when you talk of a corrupted society, the result is what you see. And I tell you, what we're doing today is not sustainable. Already you have the conflicts, you can see it, the Boko Haram, the armed robbery, the banditry, all those things are the signposts of a broken society. And as my late boss, when I was in the National Economic Intelligence Committee, used to say, Professor Samaluko, he said the time is coming when the rich will not be able to sleep because the poor have not been able to eat. That time has come. So we're living in a dog-eat-dog world that would collapse. Look, there's a country called Somalia. You may call it a failed state, but it still exists. In Nigeria today, if you took a survey, at least 80% of Nigerians will tell you that this is a failed state. And what is a failed state? A state that cannot provide for its people, a state that cannot secure its people has failed. So where are we today? Are we able to provide for our people? We have the highest ratio of poverty-stricken people in the world. We are most insecure environment. So all these things come to play. We need to redesign our system. There are folks who are calling for a new constitution. That is all well and good. But the operators of that system is what matters. For me, a constitution amendment, this and that, devolution of powers, yes, it puts a structure to how it's done. But the personnel that man the system, is critical. I gave you the example of a football match. You see players elbowing each other, doing all these sort of things, but the only thing that keeps them in check is that they have referees and linesmen who would blow the whistle when they err. Who blows the whistle in Nigeria? Everything has a price. So the system itself is so corrupted by a few that is now permeated the whole.
And so I guess, it boils down to, I think you made a point, the level of impunity, the lack of consequences, because, in 2015, a new political party actually won the election, defeating an incumbent on the promise of ending corruption, but we are still battling with it. Now, so what do you think has to happen? Because like you said, when you put yourself up, anybody at all, to become a political leader, president, governor, senator, House of Assembly member, representative, councillor, chairman of local government, whatever it is, you are setting yourself up as a good model. So it seems that our political elites have a huge role to play, in my view, if we are going to deal with this monster of corruption. But from all the things that we have seen, we have not had a consistent effort, a consistent fight against corruption because our political elite don't seem to be ready. What do you think about that?
Well, the political elites, I will not depend on them to correct the system. I will depend on the fear of the judiciary, the fear of consequences for them to live aright. Human beings have a tendency. We're all tendentious. But what keeps us in line is fear of the consequences. And look, this thing about consequences, if you're a Christian or a Muslim, whatever faith you belong to, is the consequences of your actions in the thereafter that keeps you in the narrow, in the straight and narrow. So it's instilled by the Almighty that there must be consequences for your action. You have the free will, but know that there are consequences. When you talked about 2015, the only way the PDP at that time handed over to the APC was threat from external sources. The United States weighed heavily on it. Otherwise, I do not see the PDP at that time handing over. And what happened? Literally all of the PDP migrated into the APC. So it's the same thing. The people are the same. But in a society where you have absolutely no consequences for doing this, I mean, when I look at the APC rally, I see my colleagues who were with me in the PDP, and nothing has changed. It's the same personnel just jumping from one platform to another. It has to go beyond that. It has to, look, like I said, the politicians will do whatever they could do to get beg, borrow, steal, because for you to get elected into an office, the amount of pressure, the level of poverty in society, you will be almost superhuman not to bend. But what will keep you straight is, okay, if I bend, these are the consequences of bending. Now we're so used to bending, we have now broken the society completely because there's absolutely no consequences. I mean, I've heard stories of judges soliciting bribes to give judgment in favor of one party or the other. A lot of foreign investors want to do business in Nigeria. But there's always a clause in the agreement that in the case of arbitration, they'll take it to another jurisdiction. They take it to London or wherever. In other words, they don't mind making money in your society, but they don't trust your legal system. That has discouraged a lot of investments coming into Nigeria because, look at what happened recently, the Chinese and the presidential aircraft and all that. What could be more shameful than that? And they're getting court judgments. They're getting judgments in London, in Paris, in New York. And even the president's aircraft, the presidency should be sacrosanct. But guess what? Nothing is going to happen. There'll be no consequence for what has happened. For me, if you embarrass the country anywhere, you must pay for it. So if you go commit a crime abroad, right, after serving your sentence abroad, you come back home, you serve another sentence for embarrassing the country abroad. We need to take ourselves seriously. It's sad, but Nigeria has little or no reputation to be proud of.
I see your point, former Governor Duke, on the role that the judiciary has to play in ensuring that there are consequences, and I agree entirely. But I'm also of the view that we can rework the structure. For instance, look at the process by which our political leaders are selected. There is no way, and I think you also alluded to that point, whereby there are no distinctions between the political parties. The political parties have essentially become special purpose vehicles for people to just emerge, and we don't have any form of party democracy left. Whoever is the president or whoever is the governor becomes the party and determine what it is that happened. I had a guest a couple months back, Chief Alduogbe, who said to us that when he was minister under Shagari and the party chairman will make a call during FEC, that the president will stop FEC to go and pick the call. Now, those were the days when the party meant something. The party could discipline its members. The party had an ideology, and you don't have all these kind of chicanery and shenanigans that we've had today. is the reason, Governor Duke, that I believe that we can also have some significant changes in the political system. For instance, ensuring that we find a way to have real internal party democracy in the ways that leaders are elected to go for election. You know, in addition to ensuring that we have a judiciary that makes people to be accountable.